Welcome to the deep dive. We've got source material here from quite an interesting program. It's a 12-hour intensive curriculum. The whole idea is to rapidly transfer crucial character and relationship skills fast. So, our mission today, give you the shortcut to that shortcut. We're diving into the blueprints for, well, foundational success. Specifically, we're synthesizing the frameworks they use to cultivate two really massive concepts: grit and emotional intelligence. And these aren't just buzzwords, right? They're presented as the actual tools for handling the real world.
Exactly. And when you look at the whole syllabus, I mean, it covers a huge range. Things like failing well, which we know is crucial, right through to marketing yourself later on. You realize they're aiming to build not just competence, but genuine resilience. So today, yeah, we're focusing on the architecture they use, how they define, measure, and ultimately build personal perseverance and that kind of emotional self-mastery.
Okay, let's unpack this. Starting with grit. It's a term we hear a lot, often just associated with, working hard. But this material suggests it's, well, more nuanced than that. And we really have to begin with the definitive authority they cite, Angela Duckworth.
Right. Duckworth. Her core insight, and this really anchors this part of the curriculum, is the idea that talent, it's dramatically overrated. Real accomplishment, she argues, is less about some innate genius, is much more about the dedication, the effort you put in over the long haul. It's about direction, persistence.
Yeah.
Maybe not sheer speed.
Yeah, and the formal definition they provide makes that super clear. Grit is maintaining an obsession, a dedication to a specific purpose over time. It's that ability to put in the effort even when, frankly, you just don't feel like it. That's what separates the highly accomplished from maybe the merely talented.
And what's really crucial, I think, is how this material immediately breaks that abstract idea down, breaks it into 4 actionable domains: physical grit, intellectual grit, emotional grit, and financial grit. This categorization, it helps you, the learner, figure out where you actually need to apply that perseverance.
Let's take physical grit first. It's directly linked here to overall performance. They use this simple, pretty powerful equation: physical health equals brain health. The curriculum really stresses that your body, it supports your brain's ability to endure difficulty. Makes sense. So the habits that build this foundation are framed as, well, non-negotiable. Things like daily learning, eating well, exercise, proper sleep. And this one's often overlooked: socializing. It's presented as a kind of holistic commitment. You've got to fuel the machine that does the work.
Right. And if we move from that physical foundation to the cognitive challenge, that's where intellectual grit comes in. This really tackles that central, often difficult question: how much frustration can you actually handle before you just give up? The framework presents it as enduring that space where you are, quote, not knowing.
That phrase, not knowing, it sounds a bit cryptic. How does the curriculum teach the mechanism? How do you handle that frustration? What does intellectual grit look like in action?
Well, it's fundamentally about cultivating that growth mindset we hear about. But the mechanism is about reframing difficulty. So when you hit a roadblock, intellectual grit means committing to maybe just 5 extra minutes of struggle before you ask for help. It means seeing failure not as like a final verdict on your ability, but just as new data, information telling you what approach didn't work. The goal is to maximize your time spent in that frustrating not knowing zone because, well, that's where the real growth happens.
And the source material, it gives us 2 incredible historical examples here. They really illustrate that power.
Yeah. First, Frances Perkins, first female cabinet member under FDR. Quite something. She chose to major in physics and chemistry at Mount Holyoke College. These were subjects she openly admitted gave her the worst grades back in high school. Now that shows profound grit.
Yeah.
Right? Intentionally choosing the harder path and just sticking with it until mastery.
That's amazing. And then there's the more recent, maybe equally astonishing example: Tara Westover, author of Educated, largely homeschooled, really isolated, started with almost no formal education, yet she leveraged that intellectual drive, that grit, to become a Rhodes Scholar at Cambridge. That kind of trajectory, it isn't about just natural talent, is it? It's about a deep, sustained capacity to handle ambiguity, to chase knowledge. The materials link it directly to failing well.
Okay, so that gives us the mental toughness for learning. But perseverance, it's kind of useless if you don't have the emotional framework, right? The framework to navigate the world, and crucially, your own internal dialogue. And that leads us straight into emotional grit. The source material anchors this very heavily to Don Miguel Ruiz's framework, the 4 agreements. Exactly.
Yeah.
This is where the curriculum pivots. It moves from that internal drive towards emotional protection. Ruiz's work, it's presented here as a really practical roadmap for personal transformation, moving you towards greater self-awareness and ultimately emotional peace or calm. It's about building these sort of inner walls so that external chaos doesn't completely derail your purpose.
Let's focus on these agreements then, because they seem tremendously actionable, especially for anyone trying to manage conflict, maintain their emotional energy.
Okay, the first agreement. Be impeccable with your word. Seems simple, but it's deep. It means speaking with integrity, using language constructively. Critically, it emphasizes avoiding gossip, huge energy drain, and, maybe even more importantly, stamping out negative self-talk. The power of positive expression, talking about ideas, events, rather than just criticizing people, it's seen as essential. Your words really do shape your reality.
And the second agreement, this provides that crucial layer of kind of emotional armor you need to stay
Yeah.
focused on your purpose. Don't take anything personally.
Ah, yes, this one. It might be the most transformative idea in the whole set. The material is very clear. Others' actions, their words, criticisms, it's all a projection of their reality, their own pain, their fear, maybe even their love, but it's theirs. So by consciously choosing not to internalize either the criticism or even undeserved praise, you maintain your emotional equilibrium. You avoid unnecessary suffering, and that frees up energy for your goals.
That one is incredibly hard to live by, though, especially in relationships, I imagine. Where do learners typically struggle most with the third agreement? Don't make assumptions.
Well, they struggle because making assumptions is just faster, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
faster than having a potentially difficult conversation. The curriculum highlights that assumptions are basically poison in communication. We fill in the gaps with our own narrative, and usually, let's be honest, it's the worst case scenario. The actionable instruction here is vital. If something feels inconsistent or just unreasonable, you must probe. Seek clarity instead of building this whole story based on inference.
Right. Ask the question. And rounding out the four is always do your best. Ruiz stresses effort, authenticity, a commitment to personal accountability. But it comes with that important caveat, doesn't it? Your best will vary. Your best when you're well rested and focused is very different than your best when you're exhausted or under pressure, and you have to grant yourself that grace, that understanding.
Absolutely. And if you can successfully implement those four agreements,
Yeah.
well, you've built the internal peace required to engage with the world authentically. Which brings us neatly to our next major pillar, emotional intelligence, or EQ.
Okay, EQ. And this is where we transition to Brené Brown. The curriculum positions her as maybe the architect of the modern vulnerability framework. She really reframes what many traditionally see as a weakness vulnerability into a prerequisite for true connection and personal growth.
Yeah, and here's where the synthesis in the material gets really powerful, I think. Once Ruiz teaches you, not to take things personally, Brown then challenges you to actually step into the emotional arena. The source material explicitly references Theodore Roosevelt's famous quote about the person in the arena, right, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood. EQ, in this context, is about daring greatly, even if you might fail.
So the core takeaways from Brown's work, according to this curriculum, they center on some pretty counterintuitive strengths. You have to view vulnerability as a strength, not some kind of flaw. You must consciously select courage over comfort. That's a choice. And you need to understand that empathy ultimately trumps shame.
And critically, Brown emphasizes that perfection is a myth, just a myth, waiting for the perfect time or the perfect skill set or the perfect plan. It's just procrastination in disguise, really, that pursuit of perfection. It pretty much guarantees inaction. So high EQ means accepting competence may be good enough and just moving forward.
Okay, so once we embrace that courage, step into the arena, what does a person with high EQ actually look like in their daily behavior?
The curriculum provides a clear list. Behavioral markers.
Yeah.
They take full responsibility for their own life. They don't complain or play the victim. They consciously, sometimes difficultly, cut out toxic people who drain their emotional resources. They possess strong self-knowledge. They know themselves. And they understand that seemingly small environmental factors, sleep, food, noise, have a huge influence on their mood and their performance. They manage those things.
And a crucial part of maintaining that high EQ, particularly in relationships, seems to be establishing strong boundaries. This is where Nedra Glover Tawwab's work, Set Boundaries, Find Peace, comes into the picture. Why does setting boundaries require emotional grit?
Well, because it often requires the courage to prioritize your own well-being over the immediate comfort or maybe discomfort of others. It can feel confrontational. The material breaks down three core boundary types: physical, emotional, and time boundaries. Setting them requires self-advocacy, recognizing your right to protect your energy, and then communicating your needs clearly, respectfully, but firmly.
But the challenge isn't just setting them initially, is it? It's sticking to them. Enforcement. What are the warning signs you need to look for? The signs that indicate your boundaries are being violated.
Yeah, the material lists the common emotional flags. Things like chronic feelings of resentment, that's a big one. Feeling constantly overwhelmed or just experiencing persistent emotional fatigue. If you're consistently feeling drained by a particular relationship or obligation, that's a direct signal that a boundary is either missing or it needs reinforcement. And it requires grit, that emotional grit, to stand firm when you're setting or reasserting that line.
Okay. We've covered physical health, intellectual strength, emotional relationships. Let's briefly touch on the fourth actionable type of perseverance they mention, financial grit. The outline for this section seems remarkably practical, very down to earth.
It really is. It moves beyond just theory and into sustained, disciplined action. Financial grit isn't just about, say, getting a job or budgeting once. It's the perseverance required to stick to a long-term savings plan, to resist that constant pull of consumerism, to delay gratification. The practical list includes things like rigorously avoiding credit card debt, understanding the critical distinction between investing, putting money to work for you, versus just gambling, making high, uncalculated risks, and making rational, long-term decisions about big things like housing and transportation, rent versus buy, needs versus wants. That sustained discipline, it requires massive emotional commitment, really.
So let's try and tie this together. What does this all mean for you, the learner? We've synthesized Duckworth's passion and purpose frameworks, Ruiz's guidance for achieving emotional peace, Brown's ideas on the strength of vulnerability, and Tawwab's practical self-protection through boundaries. It's a lot.
It is a lot.
Yeah.
But the curriculum doesn't stop just there. It includes two final, pretty essential tools for self-knowledge. Because fundamentally, you can't build grit if you don't understand your own emotional baseline.
Right. First, the source material includes questions on adverse childhood experiences, ACEs. These are traumas that occur before age 18, things like parental substance abuse, neglect, feeling unloved, difficult things. Why are these included in a curriculum focused on grit?
Because the level of perseverance you start with, it's often fundamentally shaped by the emotional damage you've perhaps already had to overcome. Recognizing these experiences, acknowledging them, helps you understand your own baseline resilience level. It contextualizes the difficulty you might have with certain things like trust or emotional regulation. It's presented as almost an act of self-compassion, really, to understand your own history before you try to build forward.
That's a deep point, really crucial. And the final tool they introduce is the feelings wheel.
Yes, the feelings wheel. It's a tool designed to increase intimacy, but also just expand emotional awareness, vocabulary, really.
Right.
It suggests the path to emotional grit starts with simple recognition and articulation. Can you name what you're feeling? It starts with just 6 primary feelings like mad, sad, scared, joyful, powerful, and peaceful, and then moves outward into more nuance. The underlying idea is clear. If you can't name your emotions accurately, you can't manage them effectively. And you certainly can't navigate the complex emotional landscape required to persevere toward those big, long-term goals.
So we've broken down this architecture of perseverance. We've provided you with the tools drawn from these sources. Tools from external boundaries to internal vocabulary, all aimed at actively building greater resilience and self-awareness.
Yeah, the final analysis really is. This content is explicitly designed to help you fail well, handle life's transitions, and ultimately market yourself successfully by demonstrating a character that is resilient and emotionally mature. It is all connected, isn't it? The internal framework from Ruiz gives you the courage, maybe from Brown, to maintain the boundaries Tawwab talks about, while you sustain the effort that Duckworth defines as grit.
Okay, that brings us to our final thought for you to consider. The feelings wheel suggests mastery begins with simple recognition. Think about those 6 primary feelings it lists: mad, sad, scared, joyful, powerful, and peaceful. Which one of those primary emotions do you personally struggle most to move past? And how might that difficulty impact your perseverance, your grit? It raises, I think, an important question. Can you truly be gritty if you can't clearly describe, even just to yourself, how you're actually feeling? We hope this deep dive gave you a fast track to being well informed on building character and resilience.